why we're doing this, which is to build community. You know, I guess about 30,000 people have moved here since the year 2000. Is that right? Can you imagine a community that breaks down because there's so many new people who don't know the traditions that made the community what it was in the first place? That's why we chose this book this year, is because it's a reaffirmation of what made Bend Bend, and also a lot of what made Oregon Oregon. So thank you all for coming. It's a wonderful opportunity, again, to have a community read around a very important book. Now, we would not be having the success that we're going to have this year if it weren't for a group of people who go out and raise the funds to make this happen. And just a quick plug for them, I want you to know that at the Library District, we just worship the ground that the foundation members walk on, because they do so much for us. And the woman who leads it has led it for the last 2 years, I think it is. We're very grateful to have her on board, and she's going to finish the introduction, and Malcolm.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. As I was telling people earlier, this is a little bit like waiting for Christmas. I mean, we put a lot of work into this event, and now is when the fun really starts. And so we encourage you to go to many of the events that we've got planned as part of Novel Idea. They're all great, and I think you'll really learn a lot and enjoy meeting other people in the community, which is the whole point of this. As Michael said, this book that we've selected this year is an important book for us. It's in our region. I think people have learned a lot about Oregon. I know I have, and I'm a native Oregonian, and I've lived here for 30 years, so I really have welcomed the opportunity to get to read this incredible story. I've been telling people all along that this book has something for everyone, and I think today's program has something for everyone. It's got poetry, it's got music, and it's got danger. So I just want to warn you in advance. Before we get started, I want to say some thank yous, and we'll keep these brief, but they're very important because this program wouldn't happen without the generous support of this community. In particular, today I want to thank the Starview Foundation, the sponsor of this event, Bend Research, and the Oregon Community Foundation. I also want to say a very special thank you to Teresa Bowerman and Christy Lanfrey. They led a group of people who raised the money to buy the books for this event. This is the first year that we've done a hardcover book, and we knew that some people wouldn't be able to afford to buy it. So we had to buy double the number of books that we typically buy, and through their help and the generous help of a lot of other people in this community, we bought 600 books that have been available over the past months to allow everybody access to this wonderful book. Today, I did promise you poetry, and we have John Bowerman, who is a cowboy poet, a working cowboy and a horse trainer. He lives in Fossil, and he's a natural-born storyteller whose Western heritage dates back to the 1800s. As described in the book, John's great-grandfather, Thomas B. Hoover, founded the town of Fossil in 1876, and his strong love for Central Oregon and the connection to his family's history is going to provide the foundation for his storytelling. Jay Bowerman is here with his acoustic band, the Quincy Street, and they're going to provide some music along with the storytelling that you'll hear today. Jay plays the banjo and the dobro, and he's joined by Eric Alexander on guitar, Marlene Alexander on string bass, and Lauren Irving, who plays mandolin and harmonica. And I have to tell you, I've known all of these people for many years, and this is a dangerous group. So we'll try to ensure your safety, and I hope you have a wonderful time. There are programs, reader's guides back on the back table, as well as refreshments, so please help yourself, and I hope to see you at many of the other programs that are part of the Novel Idea this year. Thanks very much for your support.
It's up to me to introduce the first song. This first song is one of 200 that we will do today. The only one, though, that wasn't written by Jay. This was written by, how many people have come from Iowa by any chance? Anybody from Iowa? We have, yeah, all right, well, this song's for you. It's about a little town in Iowa called Early. It's written by Greg Brown from Minnesota, not from Bend. called Early.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Early one morning, I walked out alone. I looked down the street, no one was around, and the sun was just coming up over my home on Hickory Street in a little farm town. Early ain't the morning light pretty, while the dew is still heavy, so bright and early. My home on the range, it's a one-horse town, and it's all right. The plow broke the prairie gave plenty. The little towns blossomed, soon there were many, scattered like fireflies across the dark night. One was called Early, they sure named it right. Early ain't the morning light green, while the dew is still heavy, so bright and early. My home on the range, it's a one-horse town, and it's all right with me. Many dry summers, parched all the fields, burnt the fine colors, cut down the yields, but the rain has returned to wash away our tears. It's the fullest green summer that we've seen in years. Early ain't the morning light pretty, while the dew is still heavy, so bright and early. My home on the range, it's a one-horse town, and it's all right.
Yeah, we know Ann too, so we are indeed dangerous. Thank you so much for having us today. This is a great privilege to be here, and I just think the selection of the book is a great selection for the novel idea. It's a great book.
On the tuner is Jay Bowerman.
Well, this is one of our fossil songs. We often refer to it as the fossil song, but its correct title is called Rocks of Ages. Our little country town, one
within the rocks of ages, beneath the sand of time. These rocks of ages are a part of God's eternal plan, and though we clutch the sand of time, they'll sift right through our hands. So when our days are over, we spend our final time, we'll join the rocks of ages and shifting sand of time. When the Hoovers and the Chambers first came to this land, the fields that they worked had never known the farmer's hand. They labored and they prospered in a land they found sublime. They built on rocks of ages, they plowed the sand of time. These rocks of ages are a part of God's eternal plan, and though we clutch sand of time, they'll sift right through our hands. So when our days are over, we spend our final time, we'll join the rocks of ages and shifting sand of time. When our tractors and our silos and our plow have turned to rust, when our buildings have all crumbled and the bricks have turned to dust, when our churches all fall silent and those bells no longer chime, we'll join the rocks of ages and shifting sand of time. These rocks of ages are a part of God's eternal plans, and though we clutch sand of time, they'll sift right through our hands. So when our days are over, we spend our final time, we'll join the rocks of ages and shifting sand of time.
You and I started.
Ann referred to this as my band. It's not. We're co-owners. Each got a quarter share in this thing. But in any case, this was one of a couple of songs that I wrote specifically for this, because this actually belonged to Thomas Benton Hoover. This was his fiddle. He started playing as a young man, and his wife, my great-grandmother, Mary Jane Chambers Hoover, according to my Aunt Beth, she said he played this and she loved to hear it. Her favorite song was an old Irish air called "Believe Me If All Those Endearing Young Charms," which almost lives in this fiddle. It just wants to be played. But I'm not going to play that for you, but we will do the Wheeler County Waltz for you. And it's, as with any of these songs, we try to make it representative of the people and the place. So here we go.
1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2. worked all his life as a farmer and a cowboy. His face was weathered and tan. He learned the hard way that life wasn't easy, but he took things in stride like a man. With an ache deep inside him, he watched as she danced with the man who would take her away. In her white wedding dress, she looked just like her mother when they danced on their own wedding day. Now her mother was gone, and except for this girl, all his world had turned faded and false. Then she came to his side, took his big calloused hand, and they danced to the Wheeler County waltz.
This next song, you probably will be able to make some connections with the comments that were made earlier in the introductory comments about all of a sudden the town increasing by 30,000 people in sort of a blink of an eye. So this is one that Jay put together, and I think it is something for us to think about as Bend and Central Oregon are growing so quickly.
Who's on the theater now?
This is why people make a lot of jokes about banjo players.
The definition of perfect pitch is when you actually hit the dumpster with the banjo.
Or what's a thousand banjos at the bottom of the ocean? It's a great start.
We really like that.
All right. Another little waltz for you. It's called Small Country Towns. I wrote this a year and a half ago after the festival was over and we were cleaning up, spent the night, got up at 6 in the morning and walked up on the brow of the hill over the town, and this is what followed.
One day I had gone at the first light of dawn, and I stood on a hill and looked down on the dusty rooftops of the houses and shops and the streets of a small country town. Small towns today are blowing away like bright colored leaves in the fall. Some can't be saved, they've been bulldozed and paid, buried beneath urban sprawl.
experts have said the small towns are dead, 'cause it's farming that kept them alive. But the global economy now sets the price, so the small family farms can't survive. When farming don't pay, the kids move away, and they go to the city, it seems, in search of fast cars, fast women and bars, chasing impossibility. Oh, the lessons we learned and the values returned, growing up in a small country town. Whatever occurred, you stood by your word, and a friend would not let you down. So where will we be in this land of the free if we let the small towns blow away? They still have a role, they're the heart and the soul of this country we live in today. Well, you've been a great audience to warm up with, and we're going to turn the floor over to John in just a minute here, but to sort of set the stage, we're going to do one more song, and this is one that hopefully John's listening, because this is about somebody that he knows. And it's called The Strawberry Blonde.
Oh, dear.
This is where things start to get dangerous. Well, I come from Fossil with a story to tell. My wife just left and I'm madder than hell. Lord knows it's not that I'm mad that she's gone, but the fact that she took everything that I own. I went on a short fishing trip with a friend. We camped out one night on a recent weekend. While I was gone, she left in the night with a man she had met on an internet site. Oh, that strawberry blonde. Oh, that strawberry blonde. They rented a U-Haul while I was away. They loaded and left in a night and a day. Oh, that strawberry blonde. The whole house was empty, the furniture gone. She'd taken the bed, the TV, and the phone. My Garth Brooks collection was not to be seen. She got my John Deere mowing machine. One look in the kitchen confirmed my worst fear. She got a gallon of Gallo, my last case of beer. She left just some shoes that I never wore, and a blanket the dog used to sleep on the floor. Oh, that strawberry blonde. Oh, that strawberry blonde. I wouldn't have cared if she'd just gone away, but she took all the stuff for my work and my play. Oh, that strawberry Levi's but what I had on, and my good cowboy boots and my Stetson were gone. She got my chainsaw and four-wheeler too, and my laptop computer was almost brand new. My shotgun was gone, and all of the rest of my guns and my ammo, my camouflage vest, my snap-button cowboy shirts couldn't be found. Where the jet ski was parked, there was only bare ground. Oh, that strawberry blonde. Oh, that strawberry blonde. How can I ever go out with the boys? She took my clothing and all of my toys. Oh, that strawberry blonde. Well, that's when I found a note on the door. It said, "So long, sucker, I'll see you no more." Have to admit, made me right sore, and I ranted and raved and I cussed and I swore. That woman has been the curse of my life since the day that I made her my wife. She was pushy and pouty, classic airhead. She couldn't fry eggs and was lousy in bed. Oh, that strawberry blonde. Oh, that strawberry blonde. I'll never remarry, I don't need a spouse. Just a blonde I can't stand, and I'll buy her a house. Oh, that strawberry blonde.
Now listen here, ladies, before it's too late. You'd better be careful when choosing a mate. There's one thing different between men and boys. It's the size of their egos and the price of their toys. So don't blame that strawberry blonde. Don't blame that strawberry blonde. There's always two sides to each story we tell. The guy was a jerk and he can go straight to hell. Don't blame that strawberry blonde.
Oh, that strawberry blonde. Okay, John, we softened them up for you. Okay, John, we softened them up for you.
Test one. There. Nope. I've been sitting back there wondering which one of my ex-wives they were singing about. And as I recall, I don't think any of them were blonde. Turn that down just a wee bit. And as I prepared for this, I really had mixed emotions about coming here. Mixed emotions is what you have when your teenage daughter comes in at 4 in the morning
with a Gideon Bible under her arm. Now, you'll get it back there in a bit. Because the article in the bulletin and also somebody was up here making introductions said I'm going to do cowboy poetry, which I'm not. We felt, Jay and I, in talking about this, it would be appropriate, since our father came from Wheeler County, Fossil, to tell stories about Fossil which did not make the book. Some of the language is inappropriate, but I am going to quote as I heard it, so none of the local flavor is lost. So if you can't stand inappropriate language, now would probably be the appropriate time to leave. I guess that's why they gave me a remote mic. This is a picture of my father when he entered the Army back during the Second World War, and I'd like to read this to you. It'll give you a little bit of an idea why we're doing this. Dear Bill, remember us? We're the student body of Medford High School. We're the ones who so often listen to your homespun yarns and tall tales of Fossil during pep assemblies, stories with a moral for the old morale. Some of us are football players who learned most of what we know from you. You coached us into a team of state champions in '39 and runners-up in '40 and '41. We miss you much. Others of us are trackmen. You taught us the fundamentals of the sport and made us practice until we made fine showings at all meets and took top honors at the Hayward Relays. We miss you too. Some of us are boys who don't excel in sports, but from your physical education classes we learned the meaning of good sportsmanship as well as its value. Some of us are just students who laughed at your jokes and various feats of skill in assemblies. In short, Bill, the whole school misses you. You always had a smile and a friendly wisecrack for everyone. The faculty misses you as much as the student body, but we all feel the same. We're proud of you, and if you can turn out fighting men in the Army like the fighting teams of Medford High School, you're where you belong, and good luck all the way. On the back, written in longhand, to John Bowerman, whenever you need a bit of an inspiration, read what we think of your dad at Medford High School. Leonard B. Mayfield, Principal, May 29th, 1942. Bill Bowerman was my father. When he was introduced, he would usually say, "Call me Bill," as Leonard did there. Most everybody did, from ordinary classroom students to world-class student athletes, preschool children to men and women well past retirement age. He was Bill. If you called him Mr. Bowerman, he would respond cordially, but if you ever called him Coach, you were going to draw his ire. Don't ever call me Coach. The meanest son of a bitch I ever met in my life insisted on being called Coach. I'm a teacher. And he was. And like all truly great teachers, he had his own style in teaching. Very much like Jesus of Nazareth, he taught using parables, stories with a moral. But whereas Jesus usually started his out, "Verily, verily, I say unto you," at least in the King James translation, Bill's would begin, "When I was a boy growing up in Fossil, Oregon," or "When I was a youngster in Wheeler County, Oregon," and then would share the story to make the point that he was trying to make. Wheeler County is Oregon's least populated county with approximately 0.8 per square mile population. Fossil is the largest city in Wheeler County with 430 souls. But if the population isn't very thick, the percentage of characters and eccentrics is extremely high. Beginning with the first permanent resident who is well documented in the biography, his great-grandfather, Chambers. J.W. Chambers. Hey, good thing I got a prompter here. And it covers that pretty well. One short thing, though. J.W., as it says in the book, was an early mountain man, guided an early wagon train over the Oregon Trail, took up a homestead over by Tualatin, and then about 1860, it was getting too crowded. So he went over to Fossil, filed a donation land claim, started building his house, and Andrew Clarno, the great-great-grandfather of Bev Clarno's husband, Ray, Andrew Clarno rode over a distance of about 30 miles and introduced himself, looked at the construction that was going on and said, "Don't you think you're crowding me quite a bit by moving in so close?" But he went ahead and built his cabin, which is this picture right up here. It still stands about 3 miles east of Fossil on the right-hand side of the road, about a quarter of a mile off the road, but you can see it from there. His daughter and son-in-law built about 4 miles up the creek. That cabin was torn down in the late 1950s, and so we have no photographs, but Bill's Aunt Maud was quite an artist, and she painted this picture of the old homestead cabin. I first came to Fossil when I was 5 years old with my grandmother and my aunt, and from that point on, 2 of my goals in life were to be a cowboy and to have a ranch near Fossil. And as I was looking for real estate, it was hard to find, I stopped in one night at the Fossil Motel, filled out the registration card like we always do, and the old boy that was running the motel, he looked down at that card and he looked up at me and he looked down at the card again and looked back up. He says, "Are you related?" I said, "Yeah, Bill was my father." "Well, I'll be a son of a bitch. I taught your dad how to walk." He said, "My name is John Putnam," and I can remember that whole evening just as well as it happened last night, and it's been 40 years ago, I guess. And he said, "My father was a horseman, so bow-legged he couldn't stop a pig in an alley." He said he rode out here from Tennessee after the Civil War, took up a donation land claim on Mayville Flat, and when I was 4 years old, he got me a pony. And I was allowed to ride that pony anywhere I wanted. The only rule that I had was I had to be home by dark. And the closest neighbors were the Hoovers. Bill's mother was a Hoover. They were about 4 miles away, and he said, I rode my pony and Bill over there, and Bill was he crawled really well, and he's starting to climb up on furniture, but he hadn't taken a step. And John said I'd hold on to his hands, and I'd lead him around. And so they were friends their entire life. And John was one of the true eccentric characters of the Fossil area. When he grew up, he wanted to be a doctor. He enrolled at Columbia University, same place where Bill got his master's degree. And John said, I was so homesick, I could hardly stand it. He said, one day I was downtown in New York. I saw a car with Oregon license plates. I stood by that car all day long just so I could talk to somebody from Oregon. He said they never showed up. I went back the next day, it was gone. So at the end of the year, he came back to Fossil and for all practical purposes never left, except for a couple of times a year he'd go to Portland. John kept a loaded revolver on top of his roll-top desk. The holster and belt hung from the chair at the desk. And John said, you never can tell when somebody might come in here at night or something and you need a little help. He said, when I go to bed, I put it on the nightstand. And he said, when I go to Portland, he says, I put it in the holster and I wear that thing around town. You can't trust those people in the big city. Always stayed at the Benson Hotel, where most of the old ranchers did. And he said, I go to bed at night, I put it on the nightstand. When I cocked. When I get up, I uncock it, put it back in the holster, and when I go down to breakfast, I've got it there, just in case. I could talk all afternoon about John Putnam stories, but my favorite comes from our cousin Lee Hoover, who was county judge. And at the time, we didn't have a planning commission, so land use hearings came before the county court. And somebody from out of state had bought a piece of real estate just outside of town and wanted to put in a subdivision. And everybody was against it. So the individual brought a high-priced lawyer from Portland to make their pitch to the county court, and the courtroom there in the courthouse was standing room only, even more packed than it is in here today, according to Cousin Lee. And this lawyer got up, and he was using a lot of 3- and 4-syllable words that he could only have learned from a law school textbook. And right in the middle of his presentation, John Putnam stood up and said, Mr. Lawyer, you're not in Portland. You're in Fossil. And you can take your jurisprudence and stick it in your ass. Lee said there was a tremendous round of applause from the crowd. And the lawyer's mouth went like this and no words came out. He sat down, folded up his briefcase, and he and his client walked out. And Lee told, when he was telling me this, he said, you know, the county court would have voted against it, but they would have appealed. But that lawyer knew there was no appealing John Putnam and the people from Fossil. It was the last we ever heard of it. The other very close friend of John's, they were a trio, was a cousin by marriage named Ed Kelsey. And Ed was best known because of his arm, I should say arms. Mary Lee Potter said one day they were standing up on the cliffs above the Clarno fossil beds, and Mary lived over across Pine Creek, and the kids were trying to see if they could throw a rock and hit the yard. And finally, Ed got a hold of a rock, and he missed the yard too. It went clear over the house and landed behind. And that's probably pretty close to a quarter of a mile, isn't it, Jay? Downhill, of course. But so when the boys were growing up, they started having town team baseball. This is not Little League. This is adult men that play baseball. And after church on Sundays, the women would spread their blankets with the picnic lunchers, and the kids would run around, and the men would play baseball. But Ed was invited to play on the town team when he was 12 years old because he could throw from the outfield all the way to home base to pick off a base runner. When he got to high school, the professional scouts were coming around to look at him and try to recruit him to play professional baseball. In those days, there were a few cars. The roads weren't very good, but the mail came in by stagecoach still, 3 times a week. And this one scout came in on Friday afternoon on the stage, and with a day to kill between when he arrived and when the game was, Ed took him hunting for sage hens on Saturday. There was only one shotgun in the Kelsey household, so Ed gave that to the scout, and as they walked out of town, Ed picked up half a dozen rocks, which he was carrying in his right hand, and 1 rock in the left hand. And a sage hen jumped up and flew, and before the scout could get the shotgun to his shoulder, Ed had knocked it down with a left-hand rock. And the scout kind of looked at him, didn't say anything. A little while later, another hen jumped up, and Ed did the same thing with the left-hand rock. And the scout said, you know, that's pretty good, but I understood you were right-handed. Ed said, well, I am, but I throw so hard with my right hand, it ruins the meat. I've heard that story from enough old-timers, I think it must be true. When Ed grew up, like John Putnam, he didn't want to leave Fossil. So he went into law enforcement, first as a deputy sheriff and later as a sheriff. I think that may even be in the book. And when Ed reached middle age, he moved to Redmond and went in the real estate business. And one afternoon, did you know Ed? Ed and John and Bill were sitting there in my living room talking about old times, and I asked him, I said, Ed, if you turned down a chance to be rich and famous playing baseball because you didn't want to leave Fossil, how come you moved to Redmond when you went in the real estate business? And Ed gave me a look like I wasn't real bright and said, because I didn't want to be responsible for selling even a portion of Wheeler County to somebody from California. That was during the time, and I think some of you here are old enough to remember when Tom McCall was governor. And Tom used to say, come visit Oregon, but don't stay. And this caused another, caused is the word, another boy from Fossil who was about the same age, not a close friend, but they knew one another, named Frank Beeson, to start a fairly lucrative business called the Oregon Ungreeting Card. And I was out of the country at the time, but I received 2 of them in the mail, and they kind of poked fun at the fact that it rains a lot over on the west side of the mountains. And one of the cards said, Oregonians don't tan, they rust. And the other one said, last year in Portland, 326 Oregonians fell off their bicycles and drowned. Like Bill, when Frank retired, he moved back to Fossil, and I had a chance to visit with him quite a little bit. I really enjoyed those times, and about a week before he died, he came down to the house, and he brought me, I'm going to run out of cord again, this picture. You can come up and look at these things later on, but this is the old Pine Creek School, which was located right next to the highway, and there are some cows around it, and the caption that Frank put on it says, Bovine University, located 15 miles west of Fossil in Wheeler County, Oregon, is one of the last remaining true, fully accredited cow colleges left in the United States. The student body shown here during a lunch break is coeducational, with females outnumbering males about 15-1. Students enjoy a full program of sports activities with the exception of ice hockey. Cows do not play ice hockey very well. So because Frank gave that to me, and it's shows something of the ingenuity of the type of people that grew up there, I really treasure that. But also because Bill's cousin Thelma taught at that school until it closed down in 1942. And as I was looking for property, Bill and I were over there just talking to anybody he could think of, and he says, let's go out and talk to cousin Thelma. Chambers' stepson, when he moved over there, took up a claim up Butte Creek, and Thelma had a house on the lower end of Woody Scoggins' property. So we went out to Thelma's, and they were visiting about old times. And Thelma got to talking about how the Hoover family in general was trying to expand the ranching operation by trading, by buying. And there was one nice little wet meadow up at the head of Hoover Creek that was still government land, but they'd all filed for all the government land they were entitled to, and they were trying to figure out a way how to get this, and finally somebody came up with the brilliant idea of filing the claim in the name of S.D. Hoover. Now, S.D. Hoover was well known in the county, so well known that Aunt Maud painted 2 portraits of him. My cousin Lee has one. I have the other. Silver Dollar was undefeated as a racehorse. He sired a great many fast horses and is probably the only equine landowner in the county. And that prompted Bill to ask Thelma, do you remember when I ran over you on Bean Belly? And Thelma got a steely-eyed look on her face and said, you damned right I remember. And they told me the story of how when in the summertime all the kids had to go out the ranch and help. And one of the things, because they farmed with horses in those days, two of the kids had to go up in the morning and wrangle the workhorses, bring the workhorses down. And it took two, because one had to stand in the trail up above the gate where over to Kinzu Junction to make sure they turned and went down to the house. And on this particular day, 7-year-old Bill and 12-year-old Thelma drew that chore, and they got up there, and Thelma jumped off and opened the gate, and then she went up the trail. And Bill went up into the pasture, and it's fairly steep up there, and the horses were way up where the good grass is, and Bill got up and got around them and started them down the hill. And they hadn't gone very far until pretty soon all the horses broke into a run. And horses, being prey animals, have an instinct that when one horse runs, they all run. And all horses know that the last one coming in the run is the one that's probably going to get eaten. So it's not very long. And Bean Belly was I back up just a little bit, was pony-sized with a big pot belly, but he had the speed of his grandfather, Silver Dollar. And some of these sharpers used to come through the country with a racehorse, and trying to get a bet to win some money. And they'd always bring out Bean Belly because he didn't look like much, but he was undefeated just like his grandfather. So anyway, pretty quick, Bean Belly is not driving the horses down off the hill. Bean Belly is leading the charge. And so Bill is pulling back on the reins for all he's worth. But racehorses run on bit pressure. So the harder Bill pulled, the faster Bean Belly ran. Down off the hill they came with the other horses pulling as hard as they could to try to keep up without any success, through the gate, and Bean Belly turns up the road, up the trail towards Kinzu Junction. The rest of the horses following. Thelma is out there jumping up and down, waving her arms and screaming, trying to turn him. At the last possible minute, she tried to jump out of the way. Bean Belly hit her with her shoulder, knocked her head over heels, and on up the trail they went. Gets pretty steep up there. After about 2 miles, he finally got him slowed down, turned around and coming back, and Thelma is still laying there beside the trail where she's been knocked down. Bill looks down at him. Are you hurt bad? Thelma looks like, you goddamn right I'm hurt bad. You ever see anybody that was hurt good? So anyway, Bill drove the horses on down, and they hitched up the wagon and came and picked up Thelma and hauled her back down. And at the end of telling this story, Thelma got kind of a little grin on her face and said, really the only thing that was hurt was my pride. But she said, I was able to play on that for about 2 weeks and just lay around the house while the other kids went out and worked. Finally, Aunt Maud caught me in some kind of mischief and put me out there hoeing her big garden with the rest of the kids. But Thelma, like Ed Kelsey, had an arm, actually 2 arms. Lee's youngest daughter, Peg, had Thelma just before she retired. And where Kelsey was famous for throwing rocks and baseballs, Thelma threw blackboard erasers. And she could be up at the blackboard writing and know that some kid was goofing off. She was ambidextrous, could write equally well or throw equally well with either hand. So she had the chalk in one hand and the eraser in the other, and to whirl around like picking off a base runner, and would hit the kid right in the forehead. And Peg said, blackboard erasers are made out of felt. They're soft. But when Thelma hit you, it felt like you'd been hit with a rock. And she said she only had to do it once. People paid attention in Thelma's class. When Bill retired, he came to Fossil. And as you read through the book, there's a lot of things I think that could constitute a legacy. But to me, the real legacy was not state championships or national championships or Olympic medals, world records, or and it wasn't becoming wealthy, co-founding a shoe company, or the philanthropy that allowed a lot of things to still be going on. I know when Bill started the shoe company with Buck Knight, he was really upset because Adidas and Puma were having about a 200% markup on their shoes, which is, you know, almost sinfully high. And he went to the president of Adidas USA and tried to convince him to bring it back down to the normal about 50%, and the guy just laughed at him. So that's how the shoe company started. And after Nike became big and those guys started getting wealthy, Bill, being on the board, would go to the board and said, "Damn it, guys, we didn't start this company to get rich. We started to make good, inexpensive shoes for American athletes." And in a fit of anger, he would resign from the board, and after he walked out, they would vote him back on again. And the next meeting, he would come back and go through the same scenario. He treated Phil Knight and Tinker Hatfield and that bunch like they were irresponsible college students, and they treated him like he was a senile old man. They were somewhat closer to the mark. But the real legacy, I think, that Bill left was whatever you're doing, do it because you really love to do it, because you're passionate about it. Don't do it for benefits, for prestige, or for money. Do it because you believe in it, you're passionate about it, and whatever rewards come or don't come, you're still going to be successful. Thank you. I guess they said there might be questions. Good.
How's your mother doing?
Pardon?
How's your mother doing?
Well, she's still got everybody in Fossil organized and was too busy to come because keep a tab on what everybody in the town is doing. She's doing well for 93 or 94.
93 next month.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Do you have any stories about the Rajneesh?
You know, it was kind of funny when I got moved in over there. My mother said, John moved to Eastern Oregon to get away from the hippies, and he hadn't been there for a year, and the Rajneesh moved in. I said I wasn't going to do any cowboy poetry, but I'll share one with you. If I haven't done this for years, but I'll see if I can't remember it. He's dressed all in red and come out of India, driving a hopped-up Rolls Royce. He's out of a job and admired to punch cattle, in a manner of speaking, of course. He asked for a smoke and looked right at me, but when I offered the makings to him, he took one look and politely refused, said he only smoked Virginia Slims. He wore a bright kerchief and gold-plated chain with a locket attached hanging down. I read the inscription on the picture inside. It said, "With all my love, Bhagwan." Now, a cowboy don't usually ask, because it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. Then he said he'd bed in the bunkhouse and give me a wink of his eye. Claimed he didn't like violence. didn't care much for people with guns. Then he asked who was my hairdresser. Said I had cute little buns. You know, a good writing job's hard to come by. Not something I'd easy dismiss. But I never thought twice about leaving when he puckered and blew me a kiss. Later they said the boss hired him. As a matter of fact, in my place. But when they told me he's just pretending, I sort of got red in the face. I realize now I got taken. I'm bumming while he's got a job. He's eating corn in the cookhouse. I'm outside chewing the cob. But tomorrow I'll look for employment, and if they say they got nothing in sight, I'll play the gay caballero because I'm wearing my red tights tonight. Okay, more questions?
You want to read it?
I don't know. I'm Gone with the Wind. Since late September, the fall of Rajneesh leadership has been swift and dramatic. The head guru came from the Carolinas to Oregon in chains by prison plane. His $400,000 payment and partial court actions was a bargain. Shushila's return from German prison has been less dramatic so far. There is every reason to pause each day and give appropriate thanks to God and His children who stood on the line while taking the red abuse, lawsuits, harassment, etc. The collapse was so fast, I got to back up here. The guru came from Oregon to the Carolinas. That's where they nailed him. The collapse was so fast that the Reds were able to dispose of great quantities of physical assets and hide bundles of money in secret accounts. A clandestine plan is even afloat to take monies for real estate as well as illegal buildings. Certainly an appropriate study of the future of the old muddy ranch should be made. The South End in Jefferson County is a geologic treasure. It holds the invaluable wartime deposits of cinnabar, mercury. The desert highland ridges are habitat of deer, chukars, pheasant, elk, and a few antelope. And yes, rattlesnakes, but no more, as Sheila feared, cobras. The high basaltic cliffs along the 10 miles of John Day and a few small meadows are scenic as well as a sportsman's heaven. The mouth of Dry Creek is an archaeological site as well as the 1855 winter camp of the Gage Wagon Train. Numerous pre- and post-Columbian India pictographs are in the area. A preliminary ad hoc study committee has already gathered material to be included in the county, state, and federal plans. That answer your question now?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Who's your neighbor now?
I don't have any neighbors.
On the big mic. Oh, who owns
Okay, who's on the Young Life, which is a Christian youth camp organization, is now on the ground at the Muddy.
Do they bug you then?
Did they bug me? You want to describe your definition of bugging? Where are we going with this line of questioning?
I just wondered if they bugged you. You know, they're
Not,
just kind of
well, they don't bug me very much. They do, they lease out hunting. Actually, it's not lease. For a $10,000 donation, you can go over there and hunt, which one of these days the government's going to come in and say, you know, other ranchers are charging $5,000 to hunt elk, and you get to go for a $10,000 tax deductible donation. $5,000 of that is probably not deductible. But the only thing that's bothered me a little, there's some guys hunt chukars right across the river from me, and my business is riding unbroke horses and problem horses that everybody else has given up on. And when those guys are shooting chuckers and the shotguns are, those horses get a little nervous sometimes. And some of you may have seen me come in the Air Life helicopter summer before last after one of those, nothing serious, couple of ribs, collarbone, collapsed lung, and some stitches in my head. Because I was still unconscious when the ambulance got there. They called the helicopter. I walked out 2 hours later. It wasn't that serious. So I'm a little careful when they're shooting chuckers over there, which horses I'm riding. I ride them early in the morning before the chuckers get out. Sir.
A few years ago, my wife and I were taking a trip to the fossil beds, and we ended up in a town called Fossil in the evening. Those were my drinking days, cocktail hour, vodka martinis. We're in this motel that was just a bunch of little houses.
Yeah.
And we parked on the lawn.
That's the motel that John Putnam ran.
Oh, okay. So comes cocktail hour, I'm looking for the ice bucket. No ice bucket. So I go over to the house. I said, where's the ice bucket? Where's the ice machine? And the woman looks at me and she says, well, takes me out to a ice thing out there, opens up the thing, and here's a little bag of ice. And she said, if you want some more, you can come back. And I took the whole ice bucket. Then she looked at me and she said, ice buckets, ice machine, this is Fossil.
John, the natives, you know, drink their water straight there, and the cowards cut it with whiskey. When the sheep herders came to town, they'd been out in the hills with their sheep for months at a time, and they spent everything they made and all they could borrow on whiskey. And when John and Bill and Ed were, before they were teenagers, they were in town, and there was a sheep herder kind of staggering along down the street, wearing bedroom slippers that were several sizes too large. And they thought it was funny to run up behind him and step on the heel of those slippers, and he would step out of them. There was another boy, the same age as those three and Frank Beeson, named John Wilson. And John Wilson was, until very recently, the only African American that ever lived in Wheeler County. And back in those days, in the 19-teens, the N-word was not a derogatory term. In fact, Ken Kesey, in his novel about the Pendleton Roundup called Last Go Around, talks about world champion bronc rider of 1912, Nigger George Fletcher. It was a term of honor, if anything. And so there were three Johns that age. There was a Native American boy, they called him Indian John, and there was John Wilson that was known as Nigger John. And then there was John Putnam, who was, I don't know why they didn't call him White John or Caucasian John. He was known by his middle name of John Francis. And Bill would get really dark tanned in the summertime. And this sheep herder mistook him for John Wilson. And about the third time they stepped on the slippers, he fell clear down on his hands and knees. And he turned around and shook his fist at them and said, John Francis and Edgar, I'm ashamed of you. And Nigger John, you little son of a bitch, if I had roller skates, I would catch you and tan your hide blacker than it is already. And John was chuckling after he told me this story, and he said, you know, it wasn't all that funny at the time because we didn't know what roller skates were. He said the street was dirt. There were no sidewalks. Roller skates would have been a bigger handicap than those bedroom slippers. And Frank Beeson was telling me not too long before he passed away that John Wilson had been in town. I'm really sorry I didn't get a chance to get in there and meet him because my house sits within 20 feet of where his house was. But I only heard stories about John Wilson. Any more questions? Going once? Thank you very much.